My name is Layla, and at 34 years old, I never imagined standing here in front of my childhood home would mean reclaiming everything I almost lost forever. I built my million-dollar real estate empire from nothing after my mother passed away, working endless hours to transform one struggling rental into something extraordinary. The man I married, the one I trusted with my heart and my life's work, nearly destroyed everything. Those papers he made me sign that night, my hands trembling as I held them, changed everything. Before I share what happened that terrible night, let me know where you're watching from. Please hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved. Your support helps other women find these stories when they need them most. I was 22 when my mother died from cancer. She left me one thing, a small rental property on Maple Street that barely broke even each month. Most people would have sold it immediately, but something inside me refused to let go of the last piece of her I had left. That property became the foundation of everything I would build over the next 12 years. I worked 3 jobs to keep that property afloat. Mornings at the coffee shop starting at 5 afternoons, doing bookkeeping for a local construction company, and evenings cleaning office buildings until midnight. Every spare dollar went into fixing that rental, learning about real estate, taking online courses about property management and investment strategies. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. By 25, I had saved enough to buy my second property, a foreclosure that needed everything replaced. I did most of the work myself, learning to tile bathrooms from YouTube videos, painting walls until 3 in the morning, replacing fixtures I bought from salvage yards. When I rented it out 6 months later for twice the mortgage payment, I knew I had found my path. The next 3 years were a blur of acquisitions, renovations, and careful financial planning. I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, wearing the same 5 outfits on rotation, driving a car that broke down every other week. But my portfolio grew. 5 properties by 26, 8 by 27, 10 by 28. Each one carefully selected, lovingly restored, and rented to good families who needed homes. That's when I met Marcus at a real estate investment conference in downtown Chicago. I was 28, finally feeling successful enough to attend these expensive networking events. He approached me during the coffee break, this tall, impeccably dressed man with perfect teeth and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You're Layla Harrison," he said, not a question but a statement. "I've been following your property acquisitions in the Lincoln Park area. Your renovation of that Victorian on Fullerton was brilliant." No one had ever called anything I did brilliant before. Marcus was an investment banker with Goldman Sachs, specialized in real estate portfolios. He spoke about capitalization rates and market dynamics with the same passion I felt about transforming neglected properties into homes. We talked through lunch, missing half the conference sessions, completely absorbed in each other's perspectives on the market. He started appearing at every real estate event I attended. Always charming, always interested in my latest project, always ready with advice that actually made sense. When he suggested dinner instead of coffee after one particularly long seminar, I said yes without hesitation. Marcus knew how to make me feel special in ways I'd never experienced. He sent flowers to my property showings with notes saying, "Another masterpiece by the artist." He introduced me to his banking connections, helping me secure better loan terms that saved thousands in interest. He never seemed intimidated by my success, instead celebrating every new acquisition like it was his own victory. 6 months into dating, he helped me analyze a commercial property deal that would have been my biggest mistake. The numbers looked perfect on paper, but Marcus spotted the zoning change proposal that would have destroyed the value within 2 years. That night I realized I was falling in love with someone who understood my ambition. We married 18 months after that first conference, a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens with just 30 guests. I paid for everything naturally, since my income was substantially higher than his banking salary. Marcus joked during his vows about being the luckiest man alive to marry a woman who could buy and sell him twice over. Everyone laughed. I thought it was sweet that he wasn't threatened by my success. The first year of marriage seemed perfect. Marcus quit his job 3 months after the wedding, saying he wanted to focus on managing our investments full-time. It made sense, he argued, since my portfolio had grown to 15 properties worth over $2 million and needed constant attention. I was relieved to have help, especially from someone who understood the financial intricacies better than I did. But Marcus's management style was different from mine. Where I focused on maintenance and tenant relationships, he focused on expensive upgrades and raising rents. He insisted we needed a luxury car to maintain appearances with high-end investors, then a country club membership for networking, designer suits because image mattered in this business. I watched our personal expenses triple while he assured me it was all investment in our future. By our third anniversary, my properties were valued at $3 million. Marcus had convinced me to leverage them for a construction loan to build a luxury mansion in Winnetka, the kind of neighborhood where CEOs and hedge fund managers lived. Our dream home, he called it. Though I had been perfectly happy in my modest townhouse, the mansion cost $1.8 million to build. Every detail chosen by Marcus, from Italian marble to smart home systems, I didn't understand. He started making jokes at dinner parties about being Mr. Layla Harrison, always with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. When friends complimented the mansion, he would quickly point out that Layla's properties paid for it, his tone carrying something I couldn't quite identify. I told myself he was proud of me, that this was his way of bragging about his successful wife. By our fifth anniversary, the portfolio value had reached $4 million. I had worked myself to exhaustion, managing properties, dealing with tenants, overseeing renovations, while Marcus attended his country club lunches and golf tournaments for networking. He hadn't brought in a single new investment opportunity, but he had plenty of ideas about how to restructure our assets for optimization. That's when things started to change in ways I should have recognized, but didn't want to see. The word optimization became Marcus's favorite. He used it constantly, usually followed by complicated explanations about tax strategies. I struggled to follow after long days managing properties. He started bringing his friend Derek around, introducing him as a tax attorney who specialized in real estate portfolios like mine. Derek made me uncomfortable from the start. He had this way of talking in circles using legal terminology that sounded important but never quite answered my direct questions. When I asked for clarification, he would exchange glances with Marcus and simplify things in a condescending tone that made me feel stupid for asking. The LLC structure we're proposing will protect your assets from any potential litigation, Derek explained during one of their late-night visits to the mansion. We'll create a series of holding companies that cascade ownership through multiple entities, making it virtually impossible for anyone to pierce the corporate veil. I was exhausted that night, having spent 14 hours dealing with a flooding issue at 2 properties. My brain couldn't process the stack of documents Derek spread across our dining room table. Marcus rubbed my shoulders, bringing me tea, telling me to trust the experts. "Baby, you're amazing at finding and fixing properties," he said softly. "Let Derek and me handle the boring legal stuff. That's what partners do, right? We each play to our strengths." The first set of documents seemed harmless enough, creating an LLC for each property. Derek assured me this was standard practice for anyone with multiple real estate holdings. I signed them between property showings, usually in my car, with Marcus holding the papers against the dashboard. Then came the management restructuring. Marcus explained that having him as the official property manager on paper would provide tax advantages. He would receive a salary that would offset our income in beneficial ways. Derek produced charts showing potential savings of hundreds of thousands over 5 years. When I mentioned wanting to run this by Sandra, my financial advisor Marcus's mood shifted instantly. "You don't trust me." His voice carried a hurt that made my stomach clench. "Sandra's great with basic investments, but this is sophisticated tax strategy. She wouldn't understand it any more than, well, it's just not her area of expertise." He was right that Sandra expressed concerns when I finally mentioned the restructuring. She wanted to review the documents, said something felt off about the complexity for what should be straightforward asset protection. Marcus was furious when I told him about her reservations. "She's jealous," he said during an argument that lasted until dawn. She sees the commissions she's losing now that I'm managing things. Of course she wants to poison you against me. I'm your husband, Layla. I've saved you hundreds of thousands already. When have I ever steered you wrong? I stopped talking to Sandra after that. Looking back, I can see how calculated it was, how Marcus systematically isolated me from anyone who might have protected me. But at the time, I just wanted peace in my marriage. I was tired of fighting, tired of feeling like I had to choose between my husband and everyone else. The documents kept coming. Transfer forms for temporary restructuring, power of attorney for emergency situations, quitclaim deeds that Derek swore were just formalities for the new LLC structure. Each time Marcus created urgency. The IRS was changing regulations. We had a narrow window for grandfathering benefits. There was an audit risk if we didn't act immediately. He started managing the bank accounts to streamline operations. I found myself asking permission to access my own money, Marcus explaining that large withdrawals could trigger unnecessary scrutiny during our restructuring. He gave me a credit card for expenses, monitoring every purchase, questioning any charge he deemed unnecessary. The late-night meetings with Derek became more frequent. I would come home at 11 after dealing with tenant emergencies to find them in Marcus's office doors locked, voices low. When I asked what was so urgent, Marcus would kiss my forehead and tell me not to worry, they were handling complicated filing deadlines. My exhaustion became his weapon. He scheduled these document signings when I was most vulnerable, after particularly difficult days when my defenses were down. A fire at one property that displaced 3 families. A tenant who destroyed an apartment before vanishing. A contractor who disappeared with $20,000 in deposits. Marcus would appear with papers and a pen, Derek beside him with explanations I was too tired to process. Just sign here, sweetheart. We'll handle everything else. I started noticing changes in how Marcus talked about the properties. My buildings, instead of ours. My tenants, when discussing rent collection. He hired a property management company without consulting me, saying I was too emotionally involved with tenants to make hard business decisions. When I protested, he reminded me that he was officially the manager on paper now. The night that changed everything started like so many others. I had spent the entire day in court with an eviction case, a heartbreaking situation with a family I'd tried to help for months. I came home drained, wanting nothing more than a hot bath and sleep. Instead, I found Marcus in the dining room with candles lit and dinner waiting. "We need to celebrate," he said, pouring expensive wine I didn't remember buying. "Celebrate what?" I asked, too tired to pretend enthusiasm. "The completion of our restructuring. After tonight, we'll be completely protected from any legal or tax consequences. Derek's here with the final paperwork." As if on cue, Derek emerged from Marcus's office carrying a leather portfolio thicker than any I'd seen before. My exhausted mind tried to engage to understand what they were asking me to sign. But the words blurred together, legal language designed to confuse rather than clarify. "These are the deeds," Derek explained, his voice unusually formal. "We're transferring ownership to the master LLC we established. It's the final step in the protection strategy we've been implementing." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Transferring ownership of what?" "Everything," Marcus said smoothly. "Temporarily, of course. Once the tax implications are resolved, everything transfers back. It's just paper baby, legal fiction for benefits." I picked up one of the documents, forcing my tired eyes to focus. It was a deed transfer for my first property, my mother's rental on Maple Street. My hands started shaking. "I'm not signing this." The room temperature seemed to drop. Marcus's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You're being emotional. This is business, Layla. We've spent months setting this up. Derek has filed preliminary paperwork. If we don't complete it, we could face penalties, audits, possibly criminal investigation for tax fraud. Then we should have discussed this before filing anything." My voice cracked with exhaustion and growing fear. Marcus stood moving behind my chair, his hands on my shoulders. But instead of the gentle massage from earlier, his fingers dug in with pressure that bordered on painful. Let me be very clear. He said, his voice different, colder than I'd ever heard it. You can sign these papers now and we continue with our plan. Or you can refuse. I file for divorce tomorrow and take half of everything anyway. Except my lawyers will make sure the process is so expensive and lengthy that there won't be much left to divide. Your choice. Derek sat silently, avoiding my eyes. I understood then that this had always been the plan. Every sweet word, every supportive gesture, every piece of advice had led to this moment. You wouldn't, I whispered. I've already consulted attorneys, Marcus replied. California is a community property state. Half of everything is mine by law. But if you sign these, we stay married, keep building wealth together. It's really the best option for everyone. He was wrong about California law since we lived in Illinois, but I was too exhausted and shocked to think clearly. The man I married had become a stranger in an instant, or maybe he was finally showing his true self. What about my mother's property? I asked, grasping for anything. Especially that one. Don't be sentimental about real estate, Layla. Your mother is gone. She doesn't care who owns it on paper. That cruelty broke something inside me. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My husband wants me to sign legal documents. I thought about calling a lawyer, but it was past 10 at night. I thought about walking out, but Marcus stood between me and the door. Sign the papers, Layla. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Through tears I couldn't stop, I signed every document. My signature got shakier with each page, but Marcus and Derek didn't care. They had what they wanted. The moment I finished the last signature, Marcus collected all the papers and handed them to Derek, who left immediately without a word. Marcus poured himself champagne, not offering me any. Smart choice. You'll see this was for the best. He left me sitting at the dining room table and went to his office. I heard him on the phone, his voice excited. It's done. Everything transferred clean. Yeah, she signed it all. No problems. We can start liquidation next week. I stumbled to the guest bathroom and vomited until nothing was left. When I finally made it to our bedroom, I found my things moved to the guest room down the hall. Marcus had locked our bedroom door. That night I lay awake in the guest room, listening to Marcus celebrating on phone calls until dawn. I heard him mention Brittany's name several times, laughing about something she'd said, making plans for lunch tomorrow to discuss next steps. The next morning I discovered I was locked out of all our bank accounts. The property management company wouldn't return my calls. Marcus had already sent letters to all tenants identifying himself as the sole owner. In less than 12 hours, I had lost everything I'd spent 12 years building. Marcus appeared in the kitchen as I was trying to access our accounts on my laptop. He looked refreshed, satisfied, like a cat that had caught a particularly elusive mouse. Don't bother, he said casually. I've updated all the passwords and contact information. You should focus on finding a job. The credit cards in your name will be canceled by end of week. This is illegal, I managed to say. You signed everything willingly. Derek recorded the whole thing on video, you sitting there, no gun to your head, signing of your own free will. Besides, who's going to believe that you, a sophisticated real estate investor, didn't understand what you were signing? He was right. Who would believe me? But he had made one crucial mistake in his arrogance. He assumed I would simply accept defeat. He assumed I had no fight left in me. He assumed wrong. The next 3 weeks were the darkest of my life. Marcus flaunted his control with casual cruelty, discussing his properties on speakerphone while I sat in the same room. He hired a new property management company, one that coincidentally employed his secretary Brittany in a senior role. He scheduled contractor meetings at the mansion, introducing himself as the owner, while I served coffee like hired help. But I wasn't as broken as I appeared. Every night while Marcus slept, I documented everything. I took photos of documents he left on his desk. I recorded his phone conversations through the bedroom door. I forwarded emails from his computer when he forgot to log out. And most importantly, I reached out to Jennifer Walsh, my friend from college who had become a successful attorney. Jennifer met me at a coffee shop downtown, her face growing paler as I explained what had happened. She reviewed the documents I'd managed to photograph. her expression shifting from concern to anger. "Layla, this is fraud. Clear documented fraud. But we need more evidence to prove it in court." She recommended a private investigator named Robert Chen, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Within a week, Robert had uncovered things about Marcus that made my blood run cold. My husband had been married twice before, both times to successful women with substantial assets. Both marriages ended with the women losing everything through similar schemes. One ex-wife lived in a studio apartment, now the other had disappeared entirely. Marcus owed over $800,000 in gambling debts to some very dangerous people in Las Vegas. The luxury car, the country club membership, the expensive suits, all of it was funded by credit cards he'd opened using my information. He'd been living a complete lie, and I was just his latest mark. Robert also discovered the affair with Brittany had been going on since before our wedding. She wasn't just his secretary, she was his partner in these schemes. They had done this together to his previous wives. Photos showed them at my properties discussing renovation plans, her wearing jewelry I recognized from charges on my credit cards. Marcus claimed were business expenses. The most devastating discovery came when Robert accessed Marcus's cloud storage through a vulnerability in his email. There were documents planning the complete liquidation of my property's sale agreements already drafted and plane tickets to Costa Rica dated for the following month. Marcus and Brittany were planning to sell everything and leave the country with my entire life's work converted to cash. But they had made mistakes in their arrogance. Jennifer found that one property transfer had been improperly executed. The notary who stamped it had lost their license 2 days before the signing. It was a technicality, but it was enough to challenge everything. Then I remembered something that made Jennifer actually smile. The prenuptial agreement Marcus had insisted on signing to protect both our assets. He thought he was being clever, ensuring I couldn't claim any of his theoretical future wealth. But it also meant that assets acquired before marriage remained separate property. My mother's rental and 5 other properties were purchased before I met Marcus. The prenup he demanded actually protected me. The real breakthrough came from the mansion's security system. Marcus had installed cameras everywhere for safety, but forgot they recorded audio as well as video. The system had captured everything from that night: Derek admitting he wasn't really a tax attorney, Marcus threatening divorce to coerce me, both of them discussing how to make me sign under duress. There was also footage from Marcus's office showing him and Derek practicing their presentation, laughing about how exhausted I looked, planning to hit me with papers after my court date when I'd be emotionally drained. They actually used the word "mark" to describe me. Jennifer worked 18-hour days preparing our case. We filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all property transfers. We submitted fraud charges to the district attorney. We contacted the state bar about Derek's false representation as an attorney. We sent cease and desist letters to the property management company. We did everything by the book, building an airtight case while Marcus remained oblivious. During this time, I had to continue living in the mansion with Marcus pretending to be defeated while secretly building my case. He grew more bold in his cruelty. Brittany started coming to the house for business meetings that lasted hours. They would kiss in the hallway where I could see them. Marcus would comment on how Brittany understood business in ways I never could. One night, Marcus brought home papers for me to sign divorce documents where I would walk away with nothing, not even my mother's rental. He left them on the guest room bed with a sticky note that said, "Sign by Friday, or I file my version." That was Tuesday. By Thursday, I was ready. I asked Marcus to meet me at the mansion Friday evening to discuss the divorce papers. I told him I wanted to understand the terms better before signing. He agreed, probably thinking he could intimidate me one more time. Jennifer had coached me carefully. I needed Marcus to admit on recording what he'd done. The security footage was good, but a clear confession would be better. I set my phone to record in my pocket and waited for him to arrive. Marcus arrived at 7 that Friday evening, and he wasn't alone. Brittany walked in beside him, wearing a designer suit I recognized from receipts I'd found, carrying a briefcase like she belonged there. The arrogance of bringing his mistress to our home for this conversation told me everything about how little he thought of me. I remained calm, offering them both coffee, playing the defeated wife perfectly. They sat on the white leather couch we'd bought for our first anniversary, Brittany's hand resting possessively on Marcus's knee. The casual cruelty of that small gesture hurt more than I expected. "So you've reviewed the divorce papers?" Marcus asked, not even pretending to care about my emotional state. "I have questions first," I said, sitting across from them. "About the property transfers. I want to understand what happened to my mother's rental." Marcus laughed, actually laughed. "It's not your mother's anything anymore. It's owned by MH Holdings LLC, which I control. Simple as that. But I built that portfolio before we met. How can you just take it? You signed it over. Remember that night with Derek? Every single property transferred clean and legal." He was enjoying this, relishing my apparent confusion. "Derek told me it was for tax purposes, that it would come back to me." Brittany snorted. "God, you really are naive. Derek hasn't been a real attorney for 3 years. Lost his license for doing exactly this kind of thing. But you didn't bother checking, did you? So it was all planned from the beginning." Marcus leaned back, completely relaxed. "From the moment I saw you at that conference, successful, lonely, desperate for someone to understand your ambition, you were perfect. Just like Catherine was perfect. Just like Melissa before her. Your ex-wives. My previous investments," he corrected. "Catherine had a chain of restaurants. Melissa owned a medical supply company. Both thought they were so smart, so successful. Both signed everything over just like you did. Where are they now? Who cares? Catherine's probably still crying to whoever will listen. Melissa was smarter, she disappeared quietly. You should consider that option." Brittany pulled out her phone, showing me pictures. "We've already renovated your mother's rental. Doubled the rent. These tenants you were so soft on, letting them pay late reducing rent when they had problems gone. Real business owners don't run charities." Each word was being recorded. Every admission of fraud, every confession of planning this scheme. I kept my face neutral, playing the broken victim they expected. "You've already started selling them," I said. It wasn't a question. 3 are under contract," Marcus confirmed. "Closing next week. Cash buyers from China who don't ask questions. The mansion goes on the market Monday. Brittany found a buyer willing to pay cash $2.5 million, more than you paid to build it. That's my life's work." "Was," Marcus corrected. "Now it's my retirement fund. Well, mine and Brittany's. Costa Rica is beautiful this time of year, I hear. How can you live with yourself?" He stood up, walking over to tower above me. "Because I'm smarter than you. Because I saw an opportunity and took it. Because in this world, you're either the one taking or the one being taken from. You were just too stupid to see which one you were." "I loved you," I said quietly. "That was your first mistake. Love is for idiots. Money is forever." He pulled out the divorce papers. "Sign these now, or I'll make your life even more miserable. I'll claim you've been embezzling from the properties. I'll say you have a drug problem. I'll destroy whatever reputation you have left." "I need a pen," I said. As Marcus turned to get one from his briefcase, I pulled out my phone and hit send on a message I'd already typed. "Actually, I don't." "What?" The doorbell rang. Marcus and Brittany exchanged confused looks. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it to reveal Jennifer and 2 police officers. "That's him," I said, pointing at Marcus. "That's the man who committed fraud to steal my properties." Marcus's face went from confusion to rage to fear in seconds. "What did you do?" "I recorded everything," I said, holding up my phone. "Every word you just said. Your confession about planning this from the start. Your admission about Derek not being an attorney. Your threats to destroy my reputation if I didn't sign." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Marcus Hammond, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit grand theft." "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted. "She signed everything willingly. I have video." "We have video too," Jennifer said calmly. "From your security system showing you coaching Derek on how to coerce her. We have emails between you and Brittany planning this scheme. We have records of you doing this to two other women. Brittany tried to run, but Officer Rodriguez caught her at the door. Brittany Chen, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. I didn't do anything, she screamed. It was all Marcus. Your name is on the property management company that's been collecting rents illegally, Jennifer informed her. You're listed as co-owner of the LLC these properties were transferred to. You're in this just as deep as he is. As the officers handcuffed them, Marcus looked at me with pure hatred. You think you've won? My lawyers will destroy you. You'll never see those properties again. Your lawyers? I asked. You mean the ones you haven't paid in 6 months? The ones who dropped you as a client yesterday when they learned about the criminal investigation, those lawyers? Jennifer had been thorough. Every avenue Marcus might use to fight back had been cut off. His accounts were frozen. His passport had been flagged. Even his parents had been informed about their son's crimes and wanted nothing to do with him. The police led them out in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their windows. Marcus tried to maintain his arrogance, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew he was finished. That night alone in the mansion for the first time in weeks, I walked through every room. The marble floors he'd chosen the chandelier. He insisted we needed the office where he'd planned my destruction. None of it felt like home anymore. It was all tainted by his presence, his lies, his betrayal. I made myself a simple dinner and ate it in the guest room where he'd banished me. But this time, I wasn't there because he forced me. I was there by choice, planning my next moves, ready to rebuild everything he'd tried to steal. The legal proceedings took 6 months, but the outcome was never really in doubt given the evidence we'd compiled. The criminal case moved faster than the civil one. Marcus and Brittany both tried to blame each other, each claiming to be the innocent party manipulated by the other. Their strategy backfired spectacularly when prosecutors used their conflicting testimonies to prove they were both guilty. The investigation revealed the scope of their crimes went far beyond what they'd done to me. Federal investigators found Marcus had been running this scheme across state lines, making it a federal offense. They discovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, with money stolen from his previous wives. Derek, whose real name was Dennis Walker, had been running similar schemes with 3 other con artists, creating a network of fraud that spanned 8 states. Marcus's first ex-wife, Catherine, came forward when she heard about the arrest. She had lost a restaurant empire worth $3 million to the same scheme 5 years ago. She'd been too ashamed to fight back, believing no one would believe her. Her testimony was devastating, showing the pattern of Marcus's behavior. They never found Melissa, the second ex-wife, but investigators discovered she had filed multiple police reports that were never properly investigated. Bank records showed Marcus had drained accounts worth over $2 million from her medical supply company before she vanished. The FBI added her disappearance to their investigation, though Marcus swore he didn't know where she went. During the trial, more victims came forward. A widow in Seattle, who Marcus had dated briefly, convincing her to invest her husband's life insurance in a fake real estate venture. An heiress in Boston who'd given him power of attorney while she was recovering from surgery. A small business owner in Phoenix who'd lost her flower shop after trusting him with refinancing. 13 victims total, with losses exceeding $15 million. The prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Dorothy Chang, painted a clear picture of Marcus as a predator who specifically targeted successful women. He would study them, learn their vulnerabilities, and create a persona designed to appeal to their specific needs. With me, he played the supportive partner who understood real estate. With Catherine, he was a food critic who appreciated her culinary genius. With each woman, he was exactly what they needed until he had what he wanted. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that these were all consensual business transactions gone wrong, but the security footage from our mansion destroyed that defense. The jury watched Derek coaching Marcus on exactly how to exhaust and pressure me. They heard Marcus laughing about how pathetic I looked when signing papers. They saw Brittany describing me as an easy mark, who was too trusting to see it coming. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, identity theft, money laundering, and racketeering. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. The judge called him a calculated predator who weaponized trust and love for financial gain. Brittany got 5 years, though she'd serve only 3 with good behavior. Derek received 7 years and was permanently disbarred. He'd never practice law again legally or otherwise. The civil case took longer, but was even more satisfying. Not only were all the property transfers voided due to fraud and coercion, but the judge awarded me substantial damages. Marcus had to pay back every cent he'd stolen plus penalties. The offshore accounts were seized and distributed among his victims. The luxury cars, country club membership, even his expensive watches were liquidated. The prenuptial agreement Marcus had insisted on became his final humiliation. Because of its terms, I kept everything I'd brought into the marriage plus damages for what he'd tried to steal. The judge specifically noted the irony of Marcus being undone by his own legal maneuvering. When everything was settled, I walked away with not just my original properties, but an additional $2 million in damages. The other victims received similar settlements, though for some money couldn't replace what they'd lost in trust and emotional damage. I sold the mansion immediately. Every room held memories of deception, and I couldn't heal in a place built on lies. It sold for $2.7 million to a lovely family with 3 children who would fill it with genuine laughter instead of calculated cruelty. I used some of the settlement money to expand my real estate portfolio, but differently this time. I partnered with other women who'd been victims of financial abuse, creating a company that specialized in providing affordable housing for families rebuilding after domestic violence. We called it Phoenix Properties, because we were all rising from ashes. Catherine joined as my first partner, bringing her business acumen and shared understanding of what we'd survived. Together, we built something Marcus never could have imagined, a company based on trust, mutual support, and genuine partnership. Within a year, Phoenix Properties owned 40 units across Chicago. We offered sliding-scale rents, financial literacy classes, and connections to resources for families starting over. Every property we acquired was transformed not just physically, but into a place of hope. My team grew to include 6 women, all specialists in their fields, all committed to our mission. We had Sarah, a contractor who'd lost her business in a divorce. Margaret, an accountant who'd discovered her husband had secret families in 3 states. Jennifer stayed on as our legal counsel, passionate about protecting women from predatory schemes. Sandra, my original financial advisor, whom Marcus had forced me to abandon, came back into my life with a fierce determination to help me rebuild better than before. She'd actually kept records of her concerns about Marcus documentation that proved valuable during the trial. She managed our investment portfolio with a protective vigilance that came from knowing how close I'd come to losing everything. The business thrived because we understood our clients in ways traditional property companies couldn't. When a tenant needed an extra week for rent because her ex-husband had drained their joint account, we understood. When a woman needed to break her lease suddenly for safety reasons, we helped her relocate without penalty. We were more than landlords. We were survivors helping other survivors. I started speaking at women's financial conferences about recognizing financial abuse. The red flags I'd missed seemed so obvious in hindsight: the isolation from advisors, the manufactured urgency, the emotional manipulation disguised as love. I shared my story not for sympathy, but as a warning and a beacon of hope that recovery was possible. During one conference in California, I met Thomas. He was a high school economics teacher, attending to better understand financial literacy so he could teach his students. He approached me after my presentation with genuine questions about protecting young people from predatory financial relationships. Thomas was everything Marcus pretended to be, but wasn't. Genuinely supportive without being controlling. Interested in my work without trying to take it over. Financially stable in his own right, content with his teacher's salary and small apartment, not seeking someone to fund a lavish lifestyle. We started as friends, meeting for coffee to discuss financial education programs for teenagers. He never pushed for more, respecting that I was still healing from Marcus's betrayal. When I finally asked him to dinner 8 months after we met, He showed up with a single daisy, not an expensive bouquet, because he'd noticed I always stopped to admire the daisies in the park where we sometimes walked. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and complete transparency. Thomas insisted on keeping our finances entirely separate, not from selfishness, but from understanding that financial independence was crucial to my sense of security. When he proposed 2 years later, he offered a prenup before I could ask one that protected both our assets completely. We married in a small ceremony at my mother's rental property on Maple Street, the one that started everything. Catherine was my maid of honor. Jennifer officiated. My Phoenix Properties partners stood as witnesses. It was simple, genuine, and entirely ours. 1 year after the trial ended, I stood in the same spot where this story began, in front of my childhood home on Oakwood Avenue. But everything was different now. I'd purchased the house from the bank after it went into foreclosure, using part of the settlement money to restore it exactly as my mother had kept it. The kitchen where she taught me to cook now hosted weekly dinners for Phoenix Properties residents learning life skills. The living room, where we'd watched old movies, became a gathering space for support groups. Her garden, which had gone wild with neglect, bloomed again with vegetables that fed families in our properties. The healing hadn't been linear. There were nights I woke up panicked, reaching for documents that weren't being taken from me. Days when a man in an expensive suit would walk by and my heart would race with remembered fear. Moments when signing any document, even a grocery receipt, made my hands shake. Therapy helped, specifically trauma-focused therapy with someone who understood financial abuse as a form of intimate partner violence. Dr. Patricia Williams helped me understand that Marcus had been an emotional predator long before he became a financial one. The money was just his weapon of choice. I learned that my exhaustion hadn't been natural, but manufactured. Marcus had deliberately overwhelmed me with property crises, many of which he'd created himself. Tenants confirmed he'd told them to call me directly with problems at all hours, instead of going through proper channels. Contractors admitted he'd instructed them to create delays that would require my constant attention. Every moment of exhaustion had been orchestrated to make me vulnerable. The shame was the hardest part to overcome. How had someone who built a real estate empire from nothing been so easily deceived? Dr. Williams helped me understand that intelligence and success don't protect against emotional manipulation. Predators like Marcus actually target successful people because they have more to steal, and their pride makes them less likely to seek help. I started a foundation with part of the settlement money, the Marcus Hammond Victims Fund, though we later changed it to the Phoenix Rising Foundation because we refused to let his name define us. The foundation provided legal assistance to victims of financial fraud in intimate relationships, a crime that often goes unreported because victims feel too ashamed to come forward. Through the foundation, I met hundreds of women and men who'd lost everything to someone they loved. Retirement funds drained by gambling addicts who hid their addiction until after marriage. Businesses destroyed by partners who'd been planning theft from day one. Houses mortgaged without knowledge for secret debts. The patterns were always similar: love trust, gradual isolation, then financial devastation. We created a handbook of red flags that became required reading in financial literacy courses across 3 states. Warning signs like sudden urgency in financial decisions, complicated explanations for simple transactions, anger when questioned about money, and isolation from financial advisors. Things that seemed obvious after the fact, but were invisible when clouded by love and trust. Marcus tried to contact me once from prison, a letter full of manipulation disguised as apology. He claimed to have found religion to be reformed to want to make amends. He asked if I would consider dropping the restitution requirements so he could start fresh when released. I didn't respond, but I did forward the letter to his parole board as evidence that he hadn't changed at all. Brittany served her 3 years and immediately tried to start the same scheme in Florida. We'd anticipated this and had alerted authorities in every state. She was arrested within 6 months for attempted fraud and sentenced to another 5 years. Some people never learn. Catherine and I grew Phoenix Properties to 200 units across Illinois and Wisconsin. We partnered with domestic violence shelters, financial counseling services, and job training programs. Our tenant retention rate was 90% because people knew we genuinely cared about their success, not just their rent checks. The business model that traditional investors called too soft proved incredibly profitable. Turns out that treating people with dignity and understanding their circumstances creates loyal tenants who maintain properties and build communities. Who would have thought that compassion could be good business? Thomas and I bought a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood, nothing like the mansion Marcus had insisted we needed. We planted a garden together, each choosing plants without needing the other's approval. He built raised beds for my tomatoes. I installed trellises for his climbing roses. We worked side by side, neither trying to control the other's section. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on the porch watching neighbors walk their dogs, children riding bicycles, normal life happening peacefully around us. Thomas would grade papers while I reviewed property reports. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd just exist in comfortable silence, the kind Marcus never could tolerate because it didn't feed his ego. The trust came back slowly in small victories. The first time I made a major financial decision without panicking. The day I signed mortgage papers without my hands shaking. The moment I realized I'd gone a whole week without checking that my properties were still legally mine. Each step forward was a triumph over what Marcus tried to do to my spirit. I returned to managing properties myself, but differently. I hired a team that worked with me, not for me, or instead of me. I stayed involved with every acquisition, every major decision, every tenant concern. But I also learned to delegate without disappearing to trust, without abdicating responsibility. My mother's rental on Maple Street became my favorite property again. I personally selected tenants for it, families who reminded me of us when she was alive, working hard to build something better. The current tenants, a young couple with twin daughters, planted flowers in the front yard without asking, just because they wanted to make it beautiful. That's when I knew I'd fully reclaimed it from Marcus's poison. Every quarter, Phoenix Properties hosted a financial empowerment workshop free to the public. We brought in experts on recognizing fraud, protecting assets, and building credit after financial abuse. The workshops filled up within hours of announcement, telling us how desperately this education was needed. At one workshop, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Her boyfriend had been pressuring her to add him to her grandmother's house deed, using the same tactics Marcus had used on me. She'd recognized the patterns from my presentation and ended the relationship before losing everything. She thanked me for sharing my story, for making my humiliation public so others could avoid it. That's when I truly understood the power of speaking up. Marcus had counted on my shame to keep me silent. He'd assumed I'd disappear like Melissa, too embarrassed to fight back. But shame only has power in silence. When we speak, when we share our stories, we take that power back and transform it into protection for others. The business partnerships I formed were all built on complete transparency. Every contract was reviewed by multiple parties. Every financial decision required documentation. Some potential partners found our precautions excessive, but those who understood our history appreciated the security our systems provided. 5 years after the trial, Phoenix Properties was featured in the Wall Street Journal as a model for socially conscious real estate investment. The article mentioned my history with Marcus, only briefly focusing instead on how trauma had been transformed into a thriving business model that proved compassion and profit weren't mutually exclusive. Marcus would be released from prison in 3 more years. The thought no longer terrified me. He'd emerged to find his victims not destroyed but thriving. His attempts to break us had instead forged us into an unbreakable network of survivors who watched out for each other and countless others who might fall prey to similar schemes. I kept a photo from the trial in my office drawer, not of Marcus being led away in handcuffs, but of me standing with the other victims outside the courthouse. We'd all been strangers before his crimes brought us together, but we'd become family through shared survival. Catherine Dorothy, Maria Susan, and all the others who'd refused to let Marcus's betrayal be the end of our stories. Sometimes young women would ask me if I regretted trusting Marcus, if I wished I'd never met him. The answer was complicated. I regretted the pain, the betrayal, the months of self-doubt and fear. But without that experience, Phoenix Properties wouldn't exist. Hundreds of families wouldn't have affordable homes. The foundation wouldn't have helped dozens of victims rebuild their lives. Marcus had tried to steal my properties, but what he'd really attempted was theft of my agency, my confidence, my ability to trust. Those were the assets that mattered most, and those were the ones I'd fought hardest to reclaim. Every signature I wrote without fear, every financial decision I made independently, every person I chose to trust despite my history was a victory over what he'd tried to do to me. The woman who'd sat at that dining room table signing papers through tears of exhaustion and fear was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more compassionate. Someone who understood that real strength wasn't in never falling but in the fierce determination to rise and lift others up with you. I stood in my childhood home looking at the wall where my mother had marked my height each birthday. At 39, I was obviously done growing physically. But in every other way, I'd grown more in the past 5 years than in the previous 34. I'd grown into someone my mother would be proud of, someone who protected others the way I'd wish someone had protected me. Marcus had been right about one thing during that terrible night. I had been naive. Naive enough to believe that love meant trust without verification, that marriage meant surrendering financial independence, that exhaustion and emotional manipulation were just the price of partnership. But naivety isn't stupidity. It's just inexperience, and experience is exactly what Marcus had given me, though not in the way he'd intended. Now when I spoke at conferences, I saw my younger self in the audience. Successful women who thought their achievements protected them from predators. Women whose partners were slowly isolating them from support systems. Women signing documents they didn't understand because they were too tired or intimidated to ask questions. I spoke directly to them, hoping my words would penetrate whatever fog of manipulation they might be experiencing. Your voice is your power. I would tell them the same words I'd whispered to myself that night in the guest room. When someone tries to silence your questions, when they make you feel stupid for seeking clarification, when they create urgency where none exists, that's when you need to speak loudest. Ask for help. Demand transparency. Never sign anything you don't completely understand, no matter who's asking or how much you love them. The hardest lesson I'd learned was that love without respect is just manipulation wearing a pretty mask. Marcus had said he loved me while systematically destroying everything I'd built. Thomas showed me that real love meant respecting my independence, celebrating my achievements without trying to claim them, and standing beside me without trying to stand in front of me. I thought about the 3 dots on the title of this story, the pause before until I spoke. That pause represented months of silence, of accepting increasingly unacceptable treatment, of believing that keeping quiet would keep the peace. But peace bought with silence isn't really peace. It's just postponed war, and the enemy gains strength while you lose yours. Speaking up hadn't been easy. It had meant admitting I'd been fooled, exposing my vulnerabilities in court, reliving trauma for investigators and prosecutors. But that speech had also been my salvation. It had connected me with other victims, brought Jennifer and Sandra back into my life, and ultimately led to Marcus's downfall. The foundation received letters every week from people who'd recognized their own situations in my story. Some had already lost everything and were rebuilding. Others had caught the manipulation early and escaped before signing anything irreversible. Each letter reinforced that sharing our pain publicly wasn't weakness, but strength multiplied by every person it helped. As I locked up my childhood home that evening, I thought about the journey from that dining room table to this moment. The path had been brutal, filled with betrayals I couldn't have imagined, and recoveries I didn't think possible. But I'd walked it, sometimes crawling, sometimes running, but always moving forward. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as I drove to the modest home I shared with Thomas. He'd have dinner started, something simple we'd eat while discussing our days. He'd listen to my property updates with genuine interest, but no desire to control them. I'd hear about his students, the ones who were beginning to understand that financial literacy was about more than just math. This was what real partnership looked like. Not one person draining the other, but two people building something together while maintaining their individual foundations. Marcus had tried to teach me that love was sacrifice and trust was surrender. But Thomas showed me that love was respect, and trust was earned through consistent action, not demanded through manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Wine and planning session tomorrow. I found 3 potential properties for Phoenix expansion. I smiled, confirming our meeting. This was my life now. Genuine partnerships, transparent business dealings, and the knowledge that every property we acquired would shelter someone rebuilding from trauma. Marcus had forced me to sign away my $1 million estate and luxury mansion, thinking I was powerless. But when I finally spoke, everything he stole came back tenfold. Not just in money or properties, but in purpose, community, and the unshakable knowledge that my voice could never be silenced again. The greatest revenge wasn't the prison sentence or the financial restitution. It was the thriving life I'd built from the ashes of what he'd burned. It was every woman who recognized his tactics in my story and escaped her own Marcus. It was the 100 families living safely in Phoenix properties. It was the love I'd found with Thomas that was based on respect instead of exploitation. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is speak our truth, no matter how painful or embarrassing it might seem. Because in that speaking, we don't just free ourselves. We light a path for others trapped in similar darkness, showing them that there's a way out, a way forward, and a community waiting to help them reclaim their voice and their life. I pulled into my driveway, seeing Thomas through the kitchen window dancing slightly to music I couldn't hear, while stirring something on the stove. This was happiness. Not the grand mansion with its marble floors and loneliness, but this simple house filled with genuine love and mutual respect. Marcus had tried to steal everything from me. In the end, his betrayal had given me more than I ever could have imagined. Not because betrayal is a gift, but because surviving it and speaking about it had transformed me into someone who could never be silenced or stolen from again. That night, as Thomas and I sat on our porch watching fireflies dance in the garden we'd planted together, I thought about everyone watching this story unfold. Maybe you're recognizing red flags in your own relationship. Maybe you're rebuilding after your own betrayal. Maybe you're supporting someone who's been through this trauma. Whatever brought you here, know this. Your voice matters. Your questions deserve answers. Your financial independence is not negotiable. And if someone tries to convince you otherwise, if they make you feel small for seeking clarity or selfish for maintaining autonomy, that's not love. That's control wearing love's mask, and you deserve so much better. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about your own financial security or relationships, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences or the red flags you've learned to recognize. Like this video if you believe in the power of speaking truth, and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and triumph. Remember, we rise by lifting others, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply share our truth so others know they're not alone. What red flags have you noticed in relationships that others might need to know about? Share them in the comments below. Together we can build a community where financial abuse has no place to hide. Stay strong, trust yourself, and never let anyone convince you that your voice doesn't matter. Because it does. It absolutely does.